gone. Hello again and welcome to Going, Going, Gone, the antiques game which will take you around the auction houses of Britain. Now, over the series, we'll be inviting keen amateur collectors to put their knowledge to the test and price a whole range of antiques and collectibles. And here to complicate matters is our panel, who'll offer 3 different descriptions and prices for each object. Now, only one will be true. Will our contestants spot the right price, or will they be hoodwinked by the fakes? The truth will be revealed when we take our cameras back to the auction house to see the object come under the hammer. Without any more ado, let's meet our panel. Now, she can advise us on a holiday bargain, but when it comes to antiques, does she get her prices right? That is the question, and that is our team captain, as always. It's Anne Gregg. We also have an extremely well-known face with us today. Television, theatre, film, many leading roles, and indeed an author of many best-selling cookery books. It is, of course, Nanette Newman. Nanette, we're delighted to have you along.
Thank you.
Now, I know you are a collector of all sorts of things, but I guess when you're involved with cookery, things like containers must be quite interesting for you, aren't they?
Well, I do collect some sort of containers. I collect old biscuit tins and toffee tins, because I made a film called Jessie a long time ago, a period film, and on the set was a mechanical biscuit tin. Really quite an incredible thing, and they gave it to me at the end of the film, so it sort of started me collecting them. So I look for very rare ones. They're quite fun to collect.
So you're always on the lookout for those little tins. So
yes.
we'll try and help you if we can. And of course, our resident antiques oracle will be helping you. He's when it comes to antiques, he's often referred to as the cat's pajamas. It's Eric Knowles. And we're delighted to have with us our 2 contestants, Maureen Gilzine, isn't it, Maureen, from Peterborough. Now, I know you're a collector of porcelain, glass and all that sort of thing, but you've brought a rather unusual piece with quite a story attached to it today, haven't you?
Indeed. This was made in the Second World War by prisoners of war, and my father brought it home for my mother. It's a lovely clutch bag, and it's actually been made out of the wrappers, the cellophane wrappers from cigarette packets.
And of course, they really just had to use anything they could really to make those things.
Right,
So what a fabulous looking piece it is as well, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, you're joined today by Christopher Loftus. Christopher, you're from the West Midlands, Birmingham, in fact, and you're a collector of Victoriana, but also you're a great Doctor Who fan.
I have been all my life.
What have you got there? What's so special about that one? I mean, I can see it's a Dalek.
Well, my aunt bought me this a few years ago from a junk shop, and it cost her a couple of bob. And I just love him to bits.
Anyway, let's get on to our first round. You know how to play the game. 10 points are at stake. We head for Sotheby's, first of all, for our first auction. And there we go to the 3-day sale. It was held earlier this year. And we see a pair of holders of some description here. Are they candles? Are they metal? What are they made of? And look at that detail. See the twisting there that goes around them. And why don't you shed some light on these 2 pieces, if I can say that to you?
Well, Maureen and Christopher, these are Tiffany vases. They're 7 inches high, and they fetched £900 at auction. This may seem very strange to you, but in fact they do have the master's mark, LCT. He was called Louis Comfort Tiffany. Imagine having a middle name, Comfort. I think it's rather wonderful. Made in the early years of this century. The extraordinary thing about them is they're actually made of glass. And that effect was achieved by spraying metallic salts on the hot glass. They're known as Favril, and that was an old English term meaning belonging to a craftsman. And Tiffany took this on as the trademark for this particular type of glass. £900 the pair.
Wow, £900 for these Tiffany vases made by Mr. Comfort. Pleasant name, isn't it? £900. Now, Nanette, any comfort in that for our 2 contestants?
No, not a lot. I think that Maureen and Christopher might have noticed that these were Art Deco lamps and made in the 1930s. And they're rather interesting because of the design. That twisted design that you mentioned is meant to be folded fabric. And of course, when they had their original lamps, white globes on top, the wires would go down inside those bases, and they would be very handsome pieces indeed. Tragically, the globes aren't with us anymore, and that halves the price. But because they're Art Deco and they're rather special, they would fetch £580.
So, £580, says Annette, a pair of Art Deco lamps, missing their globes, perhaps. Now, Eric, what are you going to tell us about these?
I'm going to tell you that they made £780, and I'm going to tell you also that this fine pair of candlesticks are 10 inches high and were made at around the turn of the century. So we're in agreement, Anne and I, at the turn of the century. However, their design is based on candlesticks at Sir John Soane's house in Lincoln's Inn Fields in London. And the Georgian architect created an entire withdrawing room, and the colour scheme that he adopted for all the furniture and all the furnishings was very much ochre. And the pair of candlesticks just fitted in perfectly with his colour scheme. Now, the soft, lustrous gold finish, now that is actually achieved by adding gold in the final moments of the glass making process. So, £780 was the price paid.
Now, Maureen and Christopher, I shall recap for you now, because there's a lot to take in there. We had Annette telling us that they are a pair of Art Deco lamps dating from the 1930s at £580. Eric, as you've just heard, telling us they're actually candlesticks based on the design by the Georgian architect Sir John Soane. £780. And then Anne tells us that there are a pair of Tiffany vases made by Mr. Comfort, Louis Comfort. What a name. £900 they went for on the day. Maureen, it's you to start us off.
Art Deco, that's a possibility. No, I think I'm going to go with Anne and her Tiffany.
Are you going to challenge on this, Christopher?
I am, yes. I might be totally wrong, but I think Eric sounded quite plausible.
Let us go back to the auction and find out what they really did go for on the day.
1452, £580. It's with me at the moment at £580. At £580. Any more interest? 580, 600, 620, 650, 680, 700, 720, 750, 780, £780. It's with me still at 780, 800, 820, 850, 880, 900. Thank you. On the phone at £900. At £900, all done. I'm selling at £900. Then 691. Thank you.
Thank goodness for the man on the phone. And £900, yes, it was that Louis Comfort Tiffany. So you get the points there. Worth a challenge, though, if I might say so, Christopher. But not to be believed this time, Eric. But now you can tell us a little bit more about them, can't you?
All I can say is that Faverol glass is not the most sought after. It's regarded as being down the pecking order. Either way, I'd be very happy to own them.
Let's go on to our next auction anyway. We go to Bairns of Exeter, and we see the spring sale there, and what came up at lot 1170 was a watch or a timepiece of some description. It has some rather unusual markings. Now look at that. Does that give anything away? It's certainly an attractive looking piece, isn't it? Nanette, why don't you tell us about this piece?
Well, it is a very attractive and quite unusual piece. It was made by a man called Edward Pryor in the early 19th century. He was a very reputable, very good name, and it was made specifically for the Turkish market because we were rather more advanced with our skills than the Turks when it came to making watches. And although the watch itself is quite basic, the case is rather ornate because the Turks like to have something that showed off their wealth. So it was exported, it was made exclusively for the Turkish market by Edward Pryor, and the price is £640.
So £640 made by Mr. Edward Pryor.
That's
and
right.
that is what Annette tells us. Eric, what are you going to tell us about
I'm going to tell you there's no Turkish delight involved here. This is £820. Now, what I'm going to tell you is going to take some believing. This is a very rare watch which once belonged to a member of the Victorian Cipher Club, C-Y-P-H-E-R, Cipher Club, whose initiates were devoted to devising codes for their own personal amusement. Now, it's an expensive piece of tomfoolery, really. I mean, the numbers have been replaced by the club's insignia, which is the elongated V. And when it comes to the actual numbers themselves, they're not in the usual positions. So only a club member would actually know where the number 12 was positioned. So now, makes it even more incredible to believe is that there are only 3 other known examples in existence. And at £820, well, I mean, once you've bought it, what do you do with it? If you can't crack that code, it's...
You've had it.
You've
can't
had
tell
it,
the
haven't you?
time. Anne, you can tell us something quite interesting about this, can't you?
Total rip-off. Absolutely total rip-off if you paid that sort of money for it. Subtract 300 and you've got the right price. At auction it was £520 because this pocket watch is a little bit of a curiosity. It is European in style basically, but it's got, as Nanette pointed out, these Arabic-inspired numerals. Now, the truth is that it was Algerian. It was made in Algeria in the last century, when, of course, Algeria was a French colony. But because it is such a mixture, and because, you know, French, Algeria isn't sort of a terribly popular thing to the Brits, it hasn't fetched a very high price. So 520 you'd get it for, but it actually is rather a nice object, I think.
So £520, Anne tells us it's Algerian. And I'm going to recap for you, Maureen and Christopher, because there's a lot to take in there. And as you've just heard, it's Algerian, made in the 19th century, probably for a French national, £520. Nanette tells us that this is a pocket watch made in London, but it's actually for export to Turkey, and it's at £640. And then Eric tells us this was a watch belonging to one of these sort of cipher societies, apparently, from Victorian times. You couldn't tell the time, but at £820, it was worth having. Now, Christopher, is it worth having for that?
No, I wouldn't pay that for it, but I think I'm going to regret this. I'm going to go for Eric again.
Are you going to challenge Maureen?
I am, yes. Anne and Nanette's stories are very similar, but to be honest with you, no offence, Anne, but I'm going to plump for Nanette.
OK, £640 against £820. Let's find out as we go back to the auction.
Lot 1170, and at 480 here, 500 may I? 500, 520, 540, 560, 580, 600, 620, £620, 640 anyone? £620, 640's bid, 660, 640 right at the back, £640.
Well, Nanette was telling us the truth there, and
There you are.
you believed Eric, I'm afraid, there,
Would
Christopher.
I lie to you? There you are.
Not at all.
But you did
Completely.
admit that it was a shot in the dark, in a sense, so I'm afraid you don't get any of the points there, but well challenged, Maureen. You were absolutely spot on. It was this export watch, and presumably a very sought-after piece, Eric, that. And did they appeal to anybody other than the Turks?
Well, yes, I think there's a great sort of international demand for that type of watch. I mean, it is essentially an English maker at the end of the day. It's, but it may be regarded something maybe as a novelty piece. But the nice thing about pieces for the Turkish market is they tend to be very brightly coloured. And obviously that appeal, that does appeal to quite a few collectors.
Excellent. So let's look at the scores at this stage. We have Maureen on 20 and Christopher there still to get off the mark, but still a long way to go as we head for our next auction. We head for Halls of Shrewsbury in Shropshire, and we see lot 164 that came under the hammer. Well, it's a chair. It's extremely well padded, isn't it? And it has some rather unusual legs. Whether that is significant or not remains to be seen. Eric, tell us about this piece.
I'll tell you, it made £75. It's a Victorian gentleman's reading chair made of walnut in the mid-19th century. And not a lot of people know this, but I think a lot of Victorian gentlemen were frustrated cowboys. And but they used to like to sit astride this chair, rather like a cowboy, you know, yee-haw, and get the old book out there, and but their arms would rest on the padded bar, you know, like that. Such chairs were a common feature in households of the professional classes, and would be found in a library or maybe a withdrawing room. And at £75, it was worth having.
So to be seated like a cowboy, £75 would have bought you one of those particular chairs. And does it have anything to do with cowboys at all, this chair?
Yes, it has got a lot to do with cowboys, because Eric is the cowboy. No, not at all. This is a chair known as a Fat Tom. Now, these were made around the 1820s. It fetched £105 at auction, and its great width is reputedly a copy of something in earlier times, but Fat Tom was in fact a Georgian bon viveur of enormous beam who got fed up sitting on all the terribly uncomfortable chairs that were found around in that period, and he commissioned this 30-inch wide seat so that he could sit comfortably. And the idea caught on, and lots more were made, in fact, right through the 19th century. So £105, I think I'd pay £105, wouldn't you?
£105 for the Fat Tom. I mean, the story is fascinating, so it's worth paying £105 for, isn't it? Nanette, would Fat Tom have been sitting on that, do you think?
I don't think so. I think Major Porky Pies from the two experts here, definitely. It was something so simple. It was a nursing chair, a Victorian nursing chair. And no nursery would be without the wonderful fat nurse sitting there in the corner, nursing the baby. And the reason they had them made like this was because they were very safe. They were very low, and it was nice because she could feed the baby and there was room for her arms. And there were a lot of them around. They were in all the well-to-do nurseries, sitting there in the corner, and the mother would come up and look at the nurse sitting there feeding her little darling. That's what it is. It's a Victorian nursery chair, and it goes for £55.
Right, Maureen and Christopher, let's just recap on those. We had the very simple description from Nanette. It's a Victorian nursing chair from a wealthy household, £55. Eric tells us that this is a Victorian gentleman's reading chair, and they would sit like cowboys on these chairs, reading whatever it was they were reading at the time. It's £75. Then Anne tells us, I love this story, it's a Fat Tom. It's a chair made in the 1820s, named after a good time Georgian gentleman, for £105. So, it's you to choose again, Maureen. Again, all very plausible, those descriptions, aren't they?
Very much so. Gentleman's chair, well, I somehow don't see a large gentleman sitting on this tiny little chair. Eric, I'm sorry, I'm not going to go with you either this time, because I really think it's Nanette.
£55, then. It would be a nice price for you as well, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would be.
Are you going to challenge, Christopher?
I think so. I must admit I'm totally flummoxed. And I know I'm going to regret this, and it's a bit like a stock gramophone. I'm going to go for Eric again.
But let's go back to the auction and let's see what it made on the day.
Lot 164. What are you going to go, £25 for it? 25, surely. Thank you, sir. 25, 30, 5, 40. At £40 now. At £40. 45, 50, 55, 60, 65, 75, 75, thank you, sir. £75, your bid, madam, at 75 and selling now at £75.
Well, I tell you that you were extremely wise to challenge that. It was not the Victorian nursing chair. Eric was absolutely... It was his actions, I think, wasn't it, when he was giving you the sort of straddling technique.
You could almost imagine it.
I was only telling the truth.
So you get some points, Christopher, at long last, which is good news. Cheap at the price, Eric. What a talking point.
Well, that's about all you can really say, isn't it, for £75? It was an idea that never really took off, I don't think. And as you can see, they don't get a very big reception when they turn up at auction. I mean, personally, I'd have thought it was going to go into 3 figures, but that's it. You can't, you know, there's no debate here. It made £75 of the day.
Right, well, let's move on to our next auction. This time we head for Tenants of Leyburn in North Yorkshire, where we came to the 2-day spring sale, and it was lot 512 that we saw. It's a painting. It's a portrait. Now, does it matter who the person is? I see he's wearing a wig there. And is it oils? I guess that, Anne, you'll be able to shed a lot more light on this piece for us and tell us who it is.
Well, this is an oil-on-board painting of Sir Geoffrey Baring, who was master of the Huntingdon foxhounds. And he, in fact, was better known than the artist. He was obsessed with hunting to the extent that he even rode one of his mounts to death once, which is not a pretty story. But the man who painted it was Alfred Ekins, who was nevertheless hung in the Royal Academy. But it hasn't fetched a very high price, £550 it went for at auction. The end of the story is rather sad because Ekins fell out with Sir Geoffrey over this, and he finished the painting without the sitter and painted him in a rather unflattering way, and Baring refused to pay him. But somebody did pay £550
£50. So you got something in the end, or perhaps, anyway, £550. Now, Nanette, who is this person we see here at this portrait?
Well, the portrait actually fetched £700, and it was painted by James Northcote, RA, who painted in the late 18th, early 19th century. And I'd like to tell you he was extremely good, but in fact he was just competent. He wasn't a great artist. It's actually a portrait of Henry Luxmore, who is a Devon surgeon. And the thing that makes this interesting is you can actually date this picture because of the wig that he's wearing, and it can be dated in 1770 because of that wig. And Northcote was highly thought of in his day, and even today people do collect his portraits, not necessarily the sort of thing of surgeons, if he did any more of surgeons, but his animal pictures go for quite a good sum of money in auction.
And so in this
£700.
case, £700
Yes,
for this. A pretty average painter, we're led to believe, this James Northcote in his day. £700. Eric, anything average about this?
It's all been very damning, hasn't it? You know, this below-average painter. I mean, Eakins being hung in the RA. I mean, what a crime to be hung for, being a poor artist. Or, oh no, he wasn't. No, Bearings didn't paint. That was whatever it is.
You've been to the RA recently.
Forget it. Forget it. Just remember this. £650, because this painting in oils is 48 inches high. It's big, and it is of the celebrated bon viveur and confidant of the Prince Regent himself, Lord Cecil Smythson. Now, it was painted when the court portrait painter Joshua Beaton was high on the list of top artists. You had to be done by Sir Josh. If you're going to be done by anybody, get Sir Josh in, and he would look after you. And what's more, he did a lot of other portraits of the Prince's friends. Now, Beaton's work, I have to say, is all right. It's not very well executed, even though it has some historical significance. But I think the price reflected that. And as for the wig, I thought he was wearing earmuffs, actually, when I looked at that. But what do I know about these things? All I can tell you is the truth. £650.
Thank you, Eric. £650, Prince Regent's friends, Lord Cecil Smythson. Right, I'm going to recap Maureen and Christopher, because there's a lot to take in there. It's, Anne tells us, it's an oil portrait of the Master of the Huntingdon Hounds, painted by Alfred Eakins, at £550. And then we heard Eric there telling us that this is a portrait of one of the Prince Regent's friends, Lord Cecil Smythson, at £650. And Annette tells us it's a portrait of a Devon surgeon, and it was painted in the 1770s by a rather average painter by the name of James Northcote. £700. You're looking slightly taken aback here at the moment, Christopher. It's you to go again.
It could be anybody. I'm not sure who to pick. I think it might be a case of eeny, meeny, miny, mo. I think I'm going to go for Nanette with £700.
This Devon, does he look like a Devon surgeon to you, does he?
I've never seen one, so... It's a wild stab in the dark.
It's a wild stab in the dark. A Devon surgeon at £700. Maureen, are you going to challenge?
Yes, I think I will do. He looks quite a portly gentleman. He looks as if he's quite used to the good life. And for that reason, I think I quite like the idea of Anne's Master of the Hounds, particularly from Huntingdon.
Well, they were big in Huntingdon, weren't they? Because that's your area,
That's my area, my neck of the woods. Yeah.
Anyway, that was £550. That was what Anne suggested, yeah?
Yes.
OK, well, let's go back to the auction, and we've got a difference of opinion. Let's find out what happened.
Lot 512, this portrait showing on the left. And from commissions on this lot, I can start the bidding at £350. £350 is bid at £350. 380, 400, and 20, 450, 480, 550, at £550 now, at 500, 650, at £650 against you on the left, at £650 now bid. Are you all done at £650? All done, 700. The bid's still on the left then at £700. This gentleman at £700, all done at 700.
Well, it was a stab in the dark, Christopher, but it was a very accurate one. It was indeed the portrait of the Devon surgeon. So finally you get some points in there, which is good news for you, isn't it? And Eric, £700 for a, you know, is that a fair price to pay for that sort of portrait?
I think a lot of portraits are very underrated, despite, you know, forget about the competence issue. I mean, obviously, they're worth that little bit more when you do know who the artist is and who the sitter is. But I have to say, when it comes to which is the more desirable. I'm afraid that rather boring old Devonian surgeons lag well behind rather buxom young ladies. So I'm afraid £700, it's enough.
It's enough to pay for a Devon surgeon, isn't it?
Stitches.
Okay, well, listen, let's check the scores out before we go any further. We have Maureen on 20, and we also have Christopher on 20. So it's all to play for as we go into our final round. Now, this is where the pair of you will be bidding against each other, okay? We are heading for Sauder & Sons of Bishop Stortford. We see lot 318, and look at this very carefully. These are apostle spoons, spoons with figures of the apostles on the handle. They're Victorian. The spoons were first made in the 15th century and usually came in sets of 13, one for each of the 12 apostles and one for the figure of Christ. So this is where you use all of your knowledge to bid against each other, but you'll need a little bit of advice. And Eric, you're the man to give us that advice.
Well, these were actually EPNS, so electroplated nickel silver. But the original silver spoons, apostle spoons, were the sort of thing that people would give as christening presents. And I think that's probably where you get the expression of being born with a silver spoon in your mouth. So do remember, we're talking electroplate, we're not talking solid silver. So don't go too heavy on this particular lot.
Right. Well, that's Eric's advice. And for you at home, this is what the apostle spoons actually made on the day. Now, having listened to that advice, Anne and Annette, why don't you jot down what you would have paid for these spoons at the auction? And what I will tell you, Maureen, Christopher, is that the starting price was just 20 quid. And we went up in fives. So maybe that gives you a hint as to how things went on the day. Anyway, let's start the bidding. You start us off, Maureen?
Yes, I'll start it off at £25.
£25 I'm bid. Christopher?
I'll go 30.
£30 I'm bid.
35.
35.
40.
£40, Christopher.
No, stick.
You're sticking, so you're at 35, aren't you, at the moment?
Yes.
Okay, Maureen. Now, would you have gone higher than 40?
I would have gone a touch higher.
How high?
Probably 50.
You'd have gone up to £50. So, £35 for Maureen I'm bid and £50 I'm bid from Christopher. All rests on this one. Let's go to the auction and let's find out what happened.
Lot 318, £50, 30, 20 I'm bid, add £20. Take 5 anywhere, 25, 30, and 35, 40, 5. At the back of the room, at £45.
Well, little in it in a sense, but in the end, you were the closest, Christopher, there. You got within £5 or so, so you get the points in this particular instance. Let's come over here and find out what Anne and Annette would have bid for
As you
these on
can
the day.
see, I tore off a piece of my jacket and
£56. You'd have been there with Maureen,
Well, I was
wouldn't you,
with
at
Maureen,
35.
yes.
That's all you really wanted to pay for them. But anyway, it was not. It was actually, on the day, it went for £45. So let's look at the scores and see how we finished today. Well, we have Maureen there on 20, and we have Christopher, who just pipped ahead there at the end. So you're our winner here today, Christopher. Congratulations to you. And you'll be receiving £100 of the vouchers to help swell your Dalek collection or anything else that you want to collect. And for you, Maureen, we have here the Collectibles Price Guide. But you've been both great sports. You've enjoyed playing it, haven't you?
It's been wonderful.
That's what it's all about.
And
And thank you to Annette for being with us today. It's always a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for watching at home. Remember, we'll be back next time with more on Going, Going, Gone. And until then, it's cheerio.